All right, here we go. Welcome back to Best Practices Handbook Review. This is part 3 of our review. The first 2 sessions are already on our YouTube channel, and links can be sent out anytime if you'd like to review the last few. To start today, let's go ahead and just do a little review of why we are doing this, why we have guidelines. So a shared catalog means that we can share materials, we can share patrons, and it's just a lot more efficient for all of us as well as for the patron experience. A lot of patrons use more than one library, and having that shared catalog really makes things easier for them. However, as a result, some practices really need to be shared in order to manage that patron database and manage the material catalog in an effective way so that there is, searching, lending, and consistent patron interactions to make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page, acting with the same intent and things like that. So a lot of our best practices are guidelines. They are meant to assist libraries in their training and operations. The guide is a support system and a reference for staff. And it's a living document, meaning that we are constantly reviewing it, updating language, changing things as our experiences or our needs change. But what it is not intended to replace or hinder local control, meaning your library board still dictates pretty much everything about how your library operates. There are some things that everybody has formally agreed upon, and those are rules. But most of what's in here is really just guidelines, things that make everything easier for everybody. The best practices guide is not an encyclopedia of every single circumstance, of every single thing a library might encounter, and it's definitely not comprehensive training manual. So there's a lot of information in here, but it shouldn't replace staff training when you get somebody new into your library. So we are going to give me just a second. And I am going to give everybody a headache real quick. And we're going to review sessions 1 and 2. So the last 2 one-hour webinars about the best practices manual took care of the first 3 chapters of the best practices guide. We talked about the difference between the rules and the recommendations. The first content page of the handbook is a list of rules that all of the directors have formally voted on and agreed upon, and they are part of your Net Southwest agreement that your board signs. So those are things that are not just recommendations, they're rules. And they are rules because they have been deemed to be so important to the operation of our ILS that everybody has agreed to share those as values. We then talked about cataloging, acquisitions, and holdings. We talked a lot about circulation and all of the pieces of circulation and dealing with patrons and materials. And then we also talked about library cards, all the different kinds of library cards, user accounts, how to enter information in different situations, and those staff accounts and security rules to keep our ILS secure and safe for everybody. And today we're going to jump back in and we're going to talk about van delivery for the beginning, and then we'll go on to the next couple chapters as well. So van delivery is obviously one of our most valuable resources. The system provides 3 days a week to the majority of our libraries and 5 days a week to a few because of the way that statewide delivery works for universities. And right now, our procedures are actually in flux. So today's a really great day to talk about it. We're going to start with what our currently standing procedures are, which most libraries are still using. So right now, our procedures are that stacks of books should not be rubber banded to exceed 4 inches high. Or if you're doing like a hand, you should be able to grab it real easy with one hand, because our delivery drivers manually sort everything, and they do that by grabbing handfuls of things out of the bin and placing them in the next bin. So they should fit easily in one hand. In addition, they should not be rubber banded together with items of differing size. So pyramiding is what we kind of call it. But when the books don't fit together the same size vertically, it makes it really tough for the delivery drivers to grab those handfuls of things and sort them. And it helps, it hurts when we are trying to keep the bins organized as well. If there's a bunch of different size things stacked together, it's really hard to get those bins to be organized. A long standing rule is that only removable tape should be used on library materials. 3M removable tape has for a long time been like the gold standard. That has been discontinued. We'll talk a little bit about our efforts to replace that, but it should be a removable tape that doesn't leave residue and doesn't tear covers. And if you are having a hard time with your tape doing one of those two things, you should avoid using it on library materials, especially library materials that belong to somebody else, because we don't want to damage each other's stuff. The goodwill of libraries and sharing relies on us taking care of each other's things, and we don't want to hinder that in any way. Right now, 2 rubber bands should be used on items that are stacked together, so one vertically and one horizontally. And transit slips should not be slid inside the plastic of DVD cases or CD cases, books on CD, things like that, because it damages the plastic and sometimes damages the cover art and stuff that's inside it. So instead of sliding it inside the plastic, it should either be attached to the front or clicked inside the case itself. Delivery bins should never be filled past the fill lines inside them. It's like 2/3 of the way up. They get too heavy, and because our bins are pretty big, our delivery drivers can have a hard time moving them around, getting them in and out of vans, and we just don't want any injuries, either for your staff who have to move bins or for our staff who have to pick them up, move them, sort them, things like that. So we have fill lines inside of those bins, and we check them on occasion to make sure that those lines are still visible. So try not to overfill your bins. One of the things that's a little bit different about WisCat is that tape should never be used on any WisCat or SIL materials. So those things outside of SWLS that go in statewide delivery out to other library systems. You should instead tape the shipping label to the rubber band that goes around the item. And they also ask that one rubber band is used on each item, and they shouldn't be stacked at all. The reason that they never want tape to be on materials is because some library systems use delivery vendors instead of in-house staff. And sometimes those vendors leave stuff overnight in vehicles or in places that aren't temperature controlled, and that tape can get hot and leave a lot of residue, or it can get cold and fall off. So they want the tape to be shipping label to rubber band if you need to hold it on there. And that's a statewide rule. So we just follow that for those materials. Now let's talk about the new delivery procedures that we have 13 libraries testing out right now. It's a pilot project that started after our April Net Southwest meeting, and we'll be revisiting that at the June Net Southwest meeting. Right now, the big changes are we are not using tape. So we made their transit slips longer, like a 2-inch, additional tail on those transit slips, so that they can stick inside materials with the destination peeking out the top. The other big change is that we are asking them to not stack or bundle materials at all. So it's one item, one rubber band horizontally around the material. So we are testing out this way of using no tape and no stacking to help reduce damage to materials, and also to help out our delivery drivers as they sort materials. So far, the feedback has been largely good, so I'm looking forward to seeing if that continues. Of course, there's going to be like the weird thing that how do I rubber band this without taping it and things like that. There's always going to be those kind of exceptions that pop up. You can reach out to me or anybody on SWLS staff if you need help with that. Something that has stayed the same is that we still do not want receipts slid inside the plastic sleeves of those DVD and CD cases, because still, like, the damage could be there if you're sliding them inside. So really, we want you to click them inside things so that they don't slide out, but also so that we're not damaging anybody's materials. Does anybody have questions so far about delivery? All right, so let's talk a little bit about the routing labels that we have. So they're called by several different names depending on your library. Might call them routing labels, might call them routing slips, you might call them transit slips, you might call them routing receipts or transit receipts. They all mean the thing that tells us where to send it. So handmade labels should have clear and legible destinations and or origination. So if you are making your own routing label because you don't have a receipt printer, your receipt printer is broken, it didn't print a slip because reasons, you should have a clear, legible destination, but you should also say where it's coming from. So this is going to Lancaster from Richland Center. Make it super clear so that if it gets lost in delivery, our staff know what to do with it or who to contact about it. The big thing is that routing labels should also use the municipal name for public libraries, not the formal name. So you might know that Brewer Public Library is Richland Center. Our drivers don't always know that. Our substitute drivers almost definitely don't know that. And so using Richland Center is a very clear way of saying where it goes. There's less confusion. We also ask that when you send stuff to schools, that you use the municipality in addition to the school name. So in Platteville, there's several schools that have names that aren't just Platteville Elementary or Platteville Middle School. And it's hard for our drivers to keep up with that stuff. So you could write Neil Wilkins, but you should also write Platteville or whatever the case might be. So that just helps with clarity. As our drivers and as our sorters, we have one that just is a sorter in our sorting room. It really just helps make everything super clear so we know where we're going and we have less chance of misrouting things. And then again, the new delivery procedure, the addition is that we added some extra space at the end, because when you're sticking a receipt inside of a book, if it's short, it might fall out, but if it's longer, it's got more staying power. So it's just really, the intent is that it doesn't fall out of the thing. All right, let's talk about supplies, because our delivery bins also transport other stuff. One of the things that we transport on a regular basis is library cards and item barcodes. Those are things that we order on behalf of all of our libraries so that the numbers are consistent but not duplicated. We handle those bulk orders on a regular basis. I think twice a year we send out emails asking people to order, but we do keep a stock at the system. So if you find yourself running low in between those order times, just reach out to Mary or Angela at SWLS, and they can help get you set up with whatever you need as far as library cards and item barcodes. Another thing that we often send out are rubber bands or interoffice mailers. We send out interoffice mailers when there's stuff we want you to have, often the director or somebody. We also send them out sometimes with book page subscriptions for those of you who are part of that membership. If you find your library has an excess of rubber bands or interoffice mailers, we encourage you to send them back to SWLS headquarters. We keep them on hand, and so libraries that need rubber bands can reach out to us and see if we have enough before they go order a bunch, because rubber bands are reusable for a very long time. And we'd be happy to send extras to you rather than making you spend supply budget on that if we have them on hand. So libraries that have a lot, send them to us and we will redistribute them as needed. Any other questions about supplies? All right, let's talk about handling other libraries' materials. And this might feel like it is review, which it kind of is. And it also might feel like common sense, which it hopefully is. But we have some guidelines about handling other libraries' materials just to reduce the amount of back and forth, missed delivery, incomplete delivery, and patron dissatisfaction that we have. So the first thing is check that all parts of a material are intact, that if it's a kit, you can check the contents list for the kit. If it is a DVD or a book on CD, just make sure that all of the discs are there. Do it when it gets delivered to you as well as before you return it in delivery. So you're going to want to do it before you send it out to your patron anyway, but also do that before you return it to the owning library. And then if an item arrives in delivery or is returned by a patron damaged, make a note of that. Don't just send it back and hope it gets taken care of on its own. Make a note of the damage, use a problem item form, which is on our website. It's got instructions on the back. So if you're not exactly sure what the procedure is, the procedures are all written out on the back of the page about, do I have to contact the library? What do I have to do about this? Who do I call? Use that problem item form to track the damage, because you don't want to mistakenly send out a material to a patron and then they get blamed for damage that was already there. But you also don't want to send back an item that was clearly chewed on by a dog to an owning library without acknowledging that that has happened. So it's just like basic courtesy to acknowledge the problem and try and help. And also, if you receive a problem item form with one of your materials, don't be offended by it. Be grateful that you can solve the problem together. You know, sometimes it's as easy as like, hey, they reported that this disc doesn't work, and maybe it just needs to be cleaned. Or, hey, I don't know if you knew this, but someone drew something on page 17 and it's not good and it's in pen. That's an opportunity to correct the damage. So try not to be upset when a library sends you a problem item form. It is intended to be helpful, not critical. Another thing about handling other libraries' materials that we used to deal with a lot, and we don't see it as often anymore, is not to alter other libraries' materials. So don't stamp in them, don't mark in them, don't tape them in a way that you would tape your own. So if you are still using stamps for due dates, put a Post-it in there. Don't stamp inside the book itself, because it's not your thing. So you shouldn't be doing that without permission from that library. I don't know how many libraries are still stamping due dates, but I know that the ones who do are usually pretty good about like sticking a Post-it in somebody else's book to stamp that due date instead of stamping right on the page. And it's just a courtesy because it's not your stuff. All right, let's talk about rotating collections. And I'm going to give you the big two things that I say to everybody when they are being oriented to our system. Red bins are for rotating collections only, and rotating collections move in red bins only. Those are the two things to remember. If you are Lancaster and Potosi, there's an exception for you. There's a red Potosi bin that goes between Lancaster and Potosi without being sorted. You're the only ones that have a different red bin. Everybody else, the rotating bins are red, and the red bins are for rotating collections. The nice thing about having this separate is that our drivers don't sort them, so you don't need to rubber band things. You don't need to label them. You label the bin itself, and the whole thing goes to the next library. So we replaced, a couple years ago, all of the red bins. We replaced every single one. We used to have blacks and grays and light blues and like a huge mess of old crummy handle-free bins. And we have replaced all of them with red bins that have handles. So rotating bins are red. And if you accidentally send one and need it back, or if you have weirdly too many, let the system know and we'll figure it out with you. But we only have enough for all of our rotating collections. So if you lose one, we got to track it down. All right, let's talk about library of things and equipment and weird shaped stuff. Anything that fits in one of our standard delivery bins, or if it fits in a single secure container that's clearly labeled, we'll deliver it as long as it's under 30 pounds, not like a bar of gold or something that's way too heavy. Anything that's over 30 pounds or things that don't fit neatly in a delivery bin needs permission before you send it. So if it's a weird shape, if you are trying to send a fishing pole, you got to talk to us first. Permission is not extended in perpetuity either. You need to ask every time. If it's a weird shaped thing, a heavy thing, a big thing, you've got to ask every time because we need to make sure that our delivery drivers are aware and prepared for those materials. And sometimes we might choose for large items, bulky items, to deliver that stuff on a different schedule from regular deliveries. So we might do it on a Tuesday or a Thursday when we have a short route rather than on a Monday, Wednesday, or Friday. Or we might say, I'm sorry, we've got rotating collections this week, so let's wait until next week to do it. Or we have to figure something else out. So we have enough room in our vans for our regular delivery, but not always a lot more depending on our loads. So we really need to be able to prepare for those weird things. And all it takes is an email to myself, to Angela, to Ed, or to Mary, and we can kind of coordinate amongst ourselves to try and make sure that we're making the best decision, make sure our drivers are ready, stuff like that. The biggest thing for us is that we can't be liable for damage to equipment or materials because you didn't package it well. We do our absolute best. Our drivers are careful, and with weird stuff, they usually try and put it somewhere in the van that's really safe. But if you're sending a 3D printer and it's not even in a box, we're not going to promise that it's going to not be damaged. We do our absolute best, but if you have things that you're worried about moving in delivery, maybe don't move it in delivery. I know we have some libraries that have things like musical instruments that people can check out that do not go in delivery. And if you need to set that up in Verso, you can always talk to me about that. I'd be happy to help figure out what works and what doesn't work. If you need advice about how to package something, you can also talk to us because a lot of times we have some suggestions about what might be an appropriate container for that item. So, and Angela said in the comments that she would like you to send her gold in delivery as long as it's under 30 pounds. All right. Any questions about delivery procedures, vans, anything like that before we move on to the next chapter in best practices? All right, let's move on then to chapter 5, which is Jen's passion project and your favorite part of the guide, I'm sure. And that is ILS maintenance activities. It is the thing I spend most of my time doing when I'm not doing your statistics. And it's something that every library should be doing, even though I'm doing some of it as well. So throughout the Best Practices Handbook, we reference these maintenance activities. We have a calendar in the appendix to give you some suggestions on when to get them done. But really, you should just build it into your annual calendar, wherever it fits. The first and most important thing is that every library should be reviewing and deleting expired patrons from the database. You should be keeping people no more than 3 years beyond their expiration date. There are reports that you can run to email patrons saying, hey, you're about to expire. Do you want to renew your card? But keeping expired patrons beyond their expiration date for too long really dilutes our patron database. It makes it harder for us to search for patrons. It makes it harder for us to find reports effective. And most importantly, for annual reporting, it gives us inaccurate numbers of how many patrons you actually have. So we have to report how many users you have, how many residents, how many non-residents, stuff like that. And if you're not purging those expired patrons that are no longer active, then those numbers aren't accurate anymore. So really, you should be doing this at least once a year. Those expired patrons should be getting deleted. You should have a policy about when it happens and how you deal with people who have maybe fines or lost items or things like that. I will say that in the Best Practices Guide, one of the rules that the libraries have agreed upon formally is that SWLS staff, and I'm pointing at myself because mostly I'm the one doing it, but we are allowed to delete patrons that have been expired for more than 3 years. We are allowed to delete patrons who are expired for more than 3 years, who have fines under $50 that are 5 years old. And we are allowed to delete patrons that have been expired for more than 3 years, that have fines or lost items more than 10 years old. So at some point, these people age out, even if they've got a couple $100 in lost materials. Like if their lost materials are more than 10 years old and they've been expired for at least 3 years, they're getting deleted. And I do this every single year in October. I warn the libraries that this is happening. So if there are patrons that you want to keep, you need to deal with those patron accounts and figure out what you're going to do about them. The next one on this maintenance activity list is annual report preparation. So this is a bunch of stuff. And again, there are some guidelines and some guidance in the handbook that gives you ideas. But you should be checking township codes for your patrons, making sure those township codes are correct. As an example, yesterday I went through 300 patrons whose township code was Other Wisconsin, and over 200 of them were wrong. So that's not great. Libraries should be checking those township codes on a regular basis. They should be looking for items that are incorrectly marked as like the wrong material type. So things that are listed as art prints, even though you don't have art prints in your library. I believe only Platteville has art prints, but it used to be the default for everyone. So lots of people accidentally had art prints, even though they were books. So you should be making sure that your stuff is in the right material type, that your stuff is in the right location, things like that. And again, there's lots of guidance and I'm happy to talk you through almost anything when it comes to annual report preparation. The next one is something that you should probably do more than once a year, and that would be searching for lost and missing and claimed returned items. So stuff gets marked as lost, stuff gets marked as missing or damaged or claimed returned. And you should be regularly going through your shelves and your Verso reports to make sure that you're resolving those things and they're not just sitting there for years and years. Because you don't want something sitting there for 3 years showing that it exists in Verso when it does not exist. You might as well delete it out of the system and clean up your records so that you don't have, hundreds of things that you're kind of maintaining in the ILS that will never return. My recommendation is that if it's been lost or missing for more than a year, get it out of Verso. Some libraries do this even sooner, some don't. I would say that if it's been lost or missing for more than a year, the odds of it coming back are so slim that you can just add it back in if it comes back. And it will be less burdensome than keeping it hanging around and going out and looking for it every month and then being frustrated when you can't find it. And it also might help you figure out what things you need to reorder. So I think every library's been through it where their brand new bestseller immediately goes missing. And if it sits there in Verso for a long time, you'll be like, oh, I have a copy of that. And don't think to reorder it when there's people waiting for it. But if you delete it from the system, the next time somebody requests it, you'll be like, oh, we should probably have that. And then it'll give you an opportunity to decide to order that material again. The next one is moving juveniles to adults. And I have great news about this one. This is really important to turn those juvenile accounts to adult accounts when they age up. There's an automatic process that I have set up for all of your libraries that does this once a month. So the only thing you need to do is let me know if you find a juvenile that is an adult that should have been changed so that I can go in and check those automatic processes. So really this one it's on here as a maintenance activity, and congratulations, everybody check it off. And the only thing you have to do is tell me if you notice something wrong. The next one on the list is in-transit items. So in the circulation tab of Verso, there is in-transit items to my library and in-transit items from my library. And every week you should be looking at that list to see what is out there in the world in between places. It will tell you if it's been in transit for more than a week, and you should try and follow up. If it's in transit to your library or from your library for more than a week, check your shelves. Check your shelves first, because most likely it's just got snuck through without, being processed properly. It happens all the time. Don't feel bad about it. It's an opportunity to correct things. If it's not on your shelves, email the library that it's in transit to or from, like that other library in that transaction, and see if they can check their shelves for it. Now, if you've done this a few times, it's maybe worth reaching out to like the whole library system, being like, this book has been gone for like a month. It's not on either of our shelves. Can everybody take a quick peek for it? If that doesn't work, then the owning library should check it in and mark it missing. Because if it's been in transit for well over a month, everybody's looked for it and it's not there. Marking it missing is a lot more accurate than leaving it stuck forever in transit. When something goes in transit and is missing, our delivery drivers and our SWLS office staff also will check the delivery room to make sure it didn't slip behind somewhere or something like that. Our drivers no longer sort on the route, so items don't come out of bins in the vans. So the only place it would be in our delivery room. And that reduces errors and misplaced items. Next up is moving overdues to patron lost. And we have set these up for every library that after an item has been overdue for 90 days, it moves to patron lost. Some libraries do this a lot sooner than 90 days, and that's fine. It's a local control issue. You are welcome to move them to patron lost on your own timeline. But 90 days is the maximum, because a lot of times we're dealing with other libraries' materials, and we want to be respectful of that relationship. So we move things to patron lost at 90 days maximum. That is, again, I've set up reports in all of your CERC reports areas. The only thing I need you to do is not delete that report. And it happens pretty often where someone accidentally removes that report from their view reports screen, the scheduled report. And if you notice that that's not there, let me know so I can set it up again. I do check them on occasion, but if you notice that there's no scheduled report called remove overdues, or I don't remember exactly what it's called. Something about remove overdue items or move to patron lost or something. There's a scheduled report that should be there all the time. And if it's not, let me know. Next up is moving your newly acquired materials. So this should happen at a minimum of once per month. That anything that is more than 2 months old in your catalog should be moved out of the newly acquired location and into its permanent location. You have to do this yourselves. There's no report that just automatically moves them for you, unless you want to just move everything, regardless of age. I can do that for you, but I can't pick a date. So moving newly acquired, there is a rule, not a guideline, about newly acquired being only used for the first 2 months of an item's life in your library. There are a few exceptions for super duper uber popular things. But other than that, newly acquired may only be used for the first 2 months of an item's life. And then you need to move it so that everybody can share the material. And this really does speed up the rate at which all people's holds get filled. Your library will benefit from this because when you move yours off of newly acquired, everyone else is doing that too. And so those shared copies move much more quickly to fill holds where they're needed. So it really does speed things up for everyone. The last one on this maintenance activities list is CERC admin settings. And this is one that I would recommend only the director or your ILS person at your library is doing. The CERC admin settings are something that I screenshot quarterly for every single library because there's a lot of settings in there that really affect the way that Verso operates for your library. So it decides like who's getting an email when someone self-registers. It decides how long your receipts are and at what point things are expired reserves instead of reserves on your shelf. It like there's just a ton of settings, and I'm happy to go through them with whoever at your library is responsible for that to make sure that they're set the correct way. A lot of times when I get people calling me saying something's wrong with our Verso, it's not doing the thing, it's because somebody changed a setting in CERC admin. Or years ago, it was because there was an update and everything changed. That no longer happens. But having those CERC admin settings checked and correct all the time is important. So having somebody at your library that knows what they should be and knows how to change them appropriately is important. And again, I am happy to train whoever it is at your library that needs to be in charge of that. I also have documentation for them so that if you can't reach me, there's a paper that says what to do. Any questions about maintenance activities? Does anybody want my job of making sure it happens? Everybody's shaking their head. Yes, you have the best job.
Never in a million years. Never.
I do have the best job. All right, let's talk about Net Southwest committees, meetings, and duties. This is in the best practices guide because it is a guide of the Net Southwest Directors Council. Libraries need to attend at least 3 of the 6 Net Southwest Directors Council meetings. This is a rule, and it is something that your library board agrees to when they sign their Net Southwest agreement. It doesn't mean the director themselves has to be there. They can send somebody else. They can send a board member or a staff member that they trust to represent the library if they wish. But your library needs to attend. They're really important. We make a ton of decisions. We decide funding things. We decide rules about how we operate. There's just so much information at these meetings that I would recommend you try and make it to as many as possible, not just 3. But the June one is the budget one, where we set our fees for the next year. So that one's the most important. But beyond that, just being at those meetings gives you an opportunity also to meet the other directors and talk about issues and ask questions that are maybe kind of percolating, but you don't know who to ask. So they're really, really great. Net Southwest committees. Right now we have 3 committees of Net Southwest. We have the Best Practices Committee, which creates this handbook. We have the Collection Development Committee, which Ed runs. And we have the Technology Committee, which Angela runs. These are committees of Net Southwest, so they meet. They're made up of libraries of different sizes, of different experiences, as well as SWLS staff, and they recommend to the full Net Southwest Directors Council things that are important for libraries. They decide how often they meet, when they meet. Usually, I think they're all meeting online right now because it's just more practical to get everybody together on Zoom. But those are currently the 3 committees. It doesn't preclude us from having other types of committees or work groups or things like that. For example, we had a work group to assess our ILS, to assess how Verso was working for us for all of last year. And that work group was made up of volunteers appointed by the Net Southwest Directors Council. And we just spent the year doing one singular project. So we also have that type of thing available when the need arises. To talk a little bit about how the Best Practices Committee works, just because I am the one that's kind of running it, we create this handbook, which is a really important document in all of our libraries. We also maintain it on an ongoing basis. It lives in Google Docs because it's easier for everyone to have the most updated copy at all times if it's a living document. SWLS staff, so right now it's me. Ed always attends because he helps us take notes and he's really great at filling in when I'm out. So we coordinate and participate in those meetings. We help with a lot of the training, for example, like this webinar series we're kind of running, but Ed and I don't just like invent best practices. We don't make them up for ourselves. We don't impose them on you. It really is a committee recommending these changes and these procedures and things like that. So it's not just us saying what you have to do. It's a group of your peers agreeing that this works best for everybody. So, all right. Any questions about Net Southwest? Then we are going to briefly look at or think about what information appears in the appendices of the handbook. The most important things are really that this is just a lot of additional information, workflow things, examples, so that libraries can use the guidance in the handbook better. The first thing in the appendix is renewal limits at each library. So every library's board is allowed to decide how many times you're allowed to renew a thing. And those renewal limits appear when you click renew for a patron and like it says, no, you can't. That's because every library has renewal limits that are different. Some libraries have 1 or 2 or 3 or like 5 renewals before it stops being allowed to be renewed. We should respect those renewal limits on those items. The next thing that happens in that guide is where information appears in a Verso record. So the most important thing is like when you go into patron edit, there's messages, notes, and comments, and it describes where those things appear. So you know which field to use when you're trying to make a pop-up on a patron account. You need to use the messages field if you want it to pop up when you enter their record. Whereas like a comment just appears in the patron summary tab, and a note, there's a notes tab that turns red if you have something in that field. So this describes where that information appears. It also includes stuff about like the primary and home phone numbers and how you have to do a cell phone number in order to make it work for SMS messaging. It talks about how to link households, notification preferences, and what to use for each situation. Stuff like that. The next thing in the appendix is out-of-state and temporary card workflows. So these would be how to decide who gets an out-of-state card or an orange temporary card versus our regular blue library card. These procedures are set, and the reason out-of-state and temporary cards are so important is because they do not allow Libby or overdrive use, because we are not allowed to offer out-of-state patrons that access. That is a statewide rule, and we are following that rule by having out-of-state and temporary cards that have a different barcode scheme. So they don't have access to that resource because we're not allowed to offer it, even for pay. We also have examples of library card applications. So we have one that everybody can use if they wish. Libraries can have their own library card applications as long as they're getting the pertinent information from their patrons. So we've got one that we recommend, but if you have a different one, that's okay. We also have examples for routing labels, which we'll probably be updating if we change our delivery procedures permanently. And then we have a suggested maintenance task calendar. So all of those maintenance tasks that I just like was raving about how awesome they are and how important they are, we have a suggested calendar to keep you on track. So if you don't know what to do or when to do it, we've got a calendar that helps you. We also have examples of the problem item form that I talked about, as well as an item payment form. So that item payment form is for when you collect payment from a patron on behalf of another library. And the most important part about that one is talk to the library first. But again, these forms have instructions on the backs. They're just half sheets of paper. You can print them from our website. You can contact us if you need us to send you some. We're happy to do so. But examples of those forms are right here in the guide, so you can take a look at them as well. And then we also have like a page of additional resources. So we have the library profiles workbook that I created that gives you lots of information about libraries. We've got some printables and things like that, and other additional resource links that we might want you to have access to. All right. Any questions about anything we talked about so far? All right. Then I will remind you that the full handbook is online. You can find it on your SWLS help page that's in your Verso staff account. So across the top where the dashboard is, there's SWLS help page. And the NetSW Best Practices Handbook is one of the things on that page. It is a link to the current document. It is also in print at your library. Every year when I do library visits, I ask you to show me your green binder. If you show me your green binder, you usually get a prize, and it's usually candy. But it should be available in your library. Once a year, if there were significant changes to the document, we reprint the contents of that binder so that you can change out the documentation. It's all tabbed by chapter. It's really easy to use or refer to or give new staff to read. I put them together because I know that when I was a library director, it was nice to have that physical copy sometimes, to just be like, and look. There's also room for you to take notes. So if like a local practice differs a little bit from what it says in the guide, you can write it in there for your staff. But they are there. And if you have questions, you can reach out to me anytime. You can call, you can email me, whatever you need, and I'm happy to talk about it. I'm also happy to come out during my library visits and talk to your staff about it. So if you have people you'd like me to work with or describe things to, work with individual procedures, I'm happy to do that as well. If you have a copy of the manual, but you no longer have the green binder it belongs in, let us know. I can't promise that we have extra chartreuse green binders, but I think we might have some. So either way, we can help you out. If you no longer have the green binder, if you're a brand new person at your library and cannot locate it, let us know and we might be able to help you out there. Any other questions from anybody today?
Jen, did you see my question in the chat?
I did not. Somebody said I didn't get any candy. Oh, why do we ask for a full paper application for a library card and fill in all of the information digitally? So the reason we ask them to write it down is because they are acknowledging in writing and usually signing that form, saying that that information is correct. When you enter it into the ILS, that is acknowledging that they've signed, saying that it's correct. So your local practice might be to enter it into the ILS with just a signature card, but that signature card should acknowledge that the information, contact, address, all of that stuff is correct, in addition to acknowledging your library policies. Because the signature doesn't digitally get uploaded. So that's why the form has stuff written down, so that they're formally acknowledging that their phone number is correct, that their address is correct, that they're legally allowed to have a library card in the state of Wisconsin or whatever. So the act of entering it into the ILS is after they've acknowledged that. So does that make sense? That's a really great question, because it does sometimes feel like duplicated effort because they write it all down and sign it, and then you have to type it all out. But yes, the reason we do it is so that they're acknowledging that that information is correct, because we have no other way sometimes of proving that they signed off on it. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you for attending. Again, you can find all of the recordings for these handbook webinars on our YouTube channel. The link will be sent out again, and in 2 months, we'll come back to the NetSW Best Practices Handbook and talk maybe a little bit about procedures, some of the more common things that we see throughout that cause confusion and things like that. So come on back again. Thank you.
Thanks,
I'm going to
Jen.
stop the recording here.